Welcome back to the History Argument. Today we are going to be discussing the causes of World War I. I'm the Brigadier General.
And I'm the Raving Raven.
Okay, so some viewers requested a visual that everybody can look at because it's on YouTube. So we made one, and I hope it helps. So one of the best ways to sum up the causes of World War I is in the acronym M.A.I.N, which it works because main causes. It's a great acronym. So M.A.I.N is comprised of militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. So first up, here's just a map of the area in question, which is Europe. And as you can see, it's color-coded. So the yellow is the Triple Entente, or the Allies, during the war. And the pink is the Central Powers, their enemy, who they were fighting during the war. And the blue is neutral countries. All right, so first up is militarism.
Yes, now this side sums it up best. The militarism is a belief or desire of a government or people that a country should remain strong in military capability and be prepared to use it aggressively to defend or promote their own national interests above the interests globally. Now, virtually all major European nations were militarizing quickly, developing quickly. You had the British and the French and the Germans in particular pushing forward with technology, growing their armies, and such like. However, it was Austria that was perhaps biggest into this. Not so much in the technologies, but the drive and the belief of not the people, but the higher command, the leaders for a war for glory and land. And this would eventually spark their involvement in Serbia. Now, this was a problem because the Austro-Hungarian Empire was at this point in a state of decline. So really there was no real feasible way that they could have won any war, let alone a global one.
Yeah, so you pretty much summed up militarism very well. It pretty much ties into nationalism, that a military should be used to assert a government's beliefs or goals, I guess, on other nations. And it's not a globalist's idea of how things should be. However, it was a major contributor to the large military buildup prior to the war. And that also ties into the alliances. So there were two main alliances in Europe at the time: the Triple Entente, comprised of France, Britain, and Russia, and the Triple Alliance, comprised of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. So these alliances were made during the 1800s. So this war there was a lot of buildup, a long time coming, and these countries were preparing and gathering their friends to prepare for the war. And do you have anything to say about alliances?
Yes, so these particular ones, really they were solidified in the late 1800s, as you said, by the events of the Franco-Prussian War, obviously between France and at that time Prussia became Germany. Now, there's an interesting thing. In the Triple Alliance, Italy had very close ties to Austria-Hungary and Germany. However, they would not join the war until later into it, and they would join the war on the Allies because they believed that more land could be gained from Austria than they could have gotten by joining the Central Powers. So in practice, the Triple Alliance sort of fell apart, and eventually the third member of the Triple Alliance would be the Ottoman Empire. But that was not how things looked back in the lead up in 1910.
Yeah, another thing I forgot to mention is that an alliance is like a rope, and these ropes tie countries together in military affairs, and this can be seen as a domino effect or a butterfly effect. So as soon as Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia was pulled into the war by their basically protectorate status. Serbia's protectorate status of Russia. And so Russia had to protect Serbia, which then brought the entire Triple Entente into the war, except for Britain, which refused to join for a while. But we'll go over that later. And the Triple Alliance brought Germany into the war, and Italy, similar to Britain, refused to join at the onset. And so it's like a rope that once one country pulls on it, everybody else falls over into the pit of war. So, all right, next up is imperialism. A couple of key words that you will hear when talking about the age of imperialism prior to World War I is the scramble for Africa and disputed borders, as everybody was really vying for the same land, which was all of Africa, and the out-of-style imperialist ideas.
Yes, so what happened in Africa, this is a pretty significant situation. It's mirrored to somewhat in Asia. But Africa is the best example. The entire continent, for the most part, with the exception of Ethiopia and Liberia, was colonized by one European power or another. Now, this would make World War I, when it began, a truly global war, as where most of the powers fighting were European. A lot of the fighting did take place in southern Africa between the British and the Germans, and to some extent in northern Africa with the French. Now, the imperialism exhibited in Africa, where the entire continent was divvied up between a handful of European nations, would do significant damage to the people of Africa, not just because of the colonialism and the imperialists oppressing the peoples, but the war that they would bring with them would damage the continent as a whole.
Yeah, and so this led to a lot of disputed borders in the lead up to the war, which created conflict among European countries and their colonized people and colonists. And so one of the important things to remember is that these basically divisions of the African continent are still, this is the shape of the countries today, and it really influences a lot of their global relations with other countries and other countries in Africa. And this was a big stain on it influenced a lot of conflict in Africa today. So,
yes.
Next up, yeah, do you have anything?
I should say about the previous slide that Africa, while it is the best example, since most of the continent was colonized, it is not the only example of the European imperialism determining the fates of other countries' involvement in this particular war. And we had conflicts over in Asia, mainly between British and Germans, and indeed in some places in the Pacific, as after this war, the Germans would lose their colonies when they lost, and that would reshape a lot of the culture in the lead up to World War II. So yeah, it makes it a truly global war when every country has a colony in almost every continent.
Yeah, also a lot of the people that were in the colony that were being colonized. My speech is really weird, but the colonized people were often drafted into the army and were used as soldiers for the European countries. And this created hatred among other African peoples as they were fighting against each other on their own continent. And this has created fissures in relations around Africa to today. So, yeah. All right. Nationalism. So, nationalism is one of the biggest war drivers. It's basically a selfish identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. So that's just the we win, you lose mindset. So do you want to talk about that?
Yes. Now, nationalism is the main driving force main difference between World War II and World War I. World War I, while certainly influenced by nationalistic beliefs, French and Russians wanting to defend their land and such. However, it comes into play more in World War II, because in World War I, really what it was the dying upper class, the rulers of the nations, wanting more land, more glory, to reclaim some of the power that they knew they were losing. And this especially manifested itself in countries and empires that were losing power and crumbling, like the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You will not find significant amounts of unifying nationalism in Austria, because they were a collection of nations ruled by a single government. And it was really inevitable that they would collapse, as it was the rich men and the powerful men choosing to run the war, using the poor people who often, especially in Austria and to some extent in the Ottoman Empire, didn't even speak the same language as the people they were fighting with. And often in Austria had more in common with the Russians, the enemy they were fighting against, and we will see desertions because of this.
Yeah, there goes the saying, rich man's war and a poor man's fight.
Yes.
Yes. So other smaller reasons was tension in the Balkans. This is mainly because of the crumbling Austro-Hungarian Empire and the so many peoples that they ruled over beginning to vie for their independence in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and especially in the Ottoman Empire, which crumbled as the war went on, and rebellious subjects and rebellion movements saw their chance.
Yes, so with this in particular, Otto von Bismarck rather prophetically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, this is not an exact quote, that the conflict of our time will be sparked in the powder keg that is the Balkans. And he was absolutely right. Austrian imperialism in the area had caused significant strife and animosity towards the Austro-Hungarians, as the peoples of Bosnia-Herzegovina and Serbia especially resented that influence in what they saw as the Austrians dominating peoples that had no relation to them. And this would obviously be the cause for the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and Austria's war in Serbia. And it would precipitate the entire war, bringing Russia in and all of that. And on the Ottoman side, as you mentioned, these big empires falling victim to their size and lack of unity. Now, we had rebels, probably the most notable ones, in the Ottoman Empire, in Syria, led by people like Prince Faisal, who eventually ended up working with the British to fight a fight that they thought would liberate them from Ottoman oppression, but really they were trading one European power for another, getting rid of the Ottoman Empire only to be colonized again by the British and French.
Yeah, all right. We need to keep this moving as we are approaching the 15-minute time limit that I set as a personal goal. So another big topic, straining Austro-Hungarian resources. They were losing power, and they needed a big win in a big way to regain it, and basically a war for gold and glory to try and regain the glory days of the empire. And finally, complicated relationships in Europe. This is mainly seen as a great example between the Germans and the French after the Franco-Prussian War, and the famous many posters and chants for retaking Alsace-Lorraine, which was a territory that the Germans took after the Franco-Prussian War, after they defeated the French.
Yeah, so those were probably the most stressed tensions between the major powers. The French resented their loss in the Franco-Prussian War. But the Germans also, while they were proud of their win, they still believed that they could get more. At least that was the prevailing idea in the German high command. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm did not share the belief that there was a need for war. He was actually, contrary to popular belief, erring on the side of peace. and maintaining stability. However, his commanders urged him to sign what would now be known as the blank check agreement with Austria, which was saying whatever action Austria took against Serbia after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Germany would back up, and Germany would align themselves with it. And so that led to the drafting of the Schlieffen Plan. And when Russia joined the war, Germany would join the war against Russia and also join against France when France declared war. And this single blank check treaty would cause Germany to get involved, and thereby the rest of the European powers to be involved. And there you have your total expansion to total world war.
Yeah, so that concludes the podcast. I'm sorry for going over 15 minutes. I believe that just a couple of pointers to remember: M.A.I.N, militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism as the main causes for the war. And thank you for joining us. This has been The Causes of World War I. I'm the Brigadier General.
And I'm the Raving Raven.